Hey everyone, and welcome to The Explainer. So today we're going to look at cities a bit differently. Not just as, flat maps or traffic grids, but as these massive, complex, living organisms that we can actually learn to read. Literally, just like a book. If you've ever walked down a street and just kind of wondered, why does this neighborhood feel like this? Or why some cities just instantly make sense while others feel like an absolute maze, well, you're absolutely in the right place. Let's dive in.
Okay, let's dive into this. How do you actually read a city, right? It's definitely not just about checking street signs or blindly following a GPS. It's really about understanding the invisible layers, the history, the social forces, the environment that have literally shaped the ground right beneath our feet. So today, we're going to establish this big, overarching theme of urban literacy. We're going to build a vocabulary together that will completely change how you look at your own hometown or even your next travel destination.
Let's move to and see how this builds with our roadmap for today. We'll start with decoding the modern city, then we're busting some ancient urban myths, checking out the elements of ancient planning, and figuring out how to read the urban environment. Finally, we'll wrap up with some essential books for your toolkit and a look at designing the future city.
All right, starting right off with Section 1, Decoding the Modern City.
So the crucial point is that contemporary cities are what researchers like to call urbanisms of multiplicity. Basically, they're incredibly complex. They're shaped by all these varied temporal layers, heterogeneous constituents, and people from wildly diverse backgrounds all sharing the exact same space. Because of this, we really can't understand them using just one single design idiom. It doesn't work. To truly decode a city, we have to look at amalgamation, how different principles, movements, and tools all merge together to generate a completely new framework. Historically, this blending process has been the exact mechanism used to negotiate the extreme opposites that are constantly fighting for space within city boundaries.
We see this constant negotiation playing out in what we call urban binaries. Think about it. Planned versus unplanned. Order versus chaos, wealth versus poverty, efficiency versus waste. These opposing forces are constantly at play, pulling at our urban fabrics. But, and this is key, they don't have distinct margins. There's no neat little line separating them. Instead, they're in this constant, ongoing dialogue with each other. And right between these binaries is a space for continued negotiation. Honestly, the multiplicity they create is exactly what gives our modern cities their totally unique textures and forms.
Moving on to Section 2, Ancient Urban Myths Busted. Let's travel back in time a bit.
Now, what's really interesting about this is how we reframe history. For decades, V. Gordon Child's super-influential urban revolution framework had everyone convinced that ancient cities were strictly compact, physically bounded, and driven by a centralized authority. I mean, this was basically treated as gospel. But thanks to modern remote sensing and paleoclimate data, we now know that was actually completely wrong. It turns out ancient cities were just as complex and just as wildly varied as ours are today.
Recent archaeological discoveries are literally rewriting the textbooks. Take researcher Emily Hammer, for example. She used UAV photography and magnetic gradiometry in Mesopotamia, and she revealed that early cities, like Lagash, were multi-centric. They were spread out across marsh islands with this incredibly organic, bottom-up growth. Then, over in Mesoamerica, Maya cities featured low-density, dispersed settlements that were integrated right into the tropical forests. And in the Indus Valley, we see this incredibly complex urban organization without any clear centralized palaces whatsoever. The pathways to ancient urbanism were just staggeringly diverse, which totally busts that old myth of the singular, compact ancient city.
Which brings us to Section 3, Elements of Ancient Planning.
And this brilliantly illustrates how, between roughly 3500 BCE and 100 CE, these regions independently developed massive, complex urban societies. How did they practically solve the crazy challenges of organizing populations and managing resources? Well, in Mesopotamia, we see organic, emergent layouts adapting specifically to marshlands. Then you look at the Indus Valley, utilizing a highly planned grid system driven primarily by cultural norms. And then there's Teotihuacan in Mesoamerica, featuring an orthogonal grid organized around cosmological principles with corporate neighborhood-based housing. These three totally distinct regions independently solved massive population and environmental challenges through vastly different planning structures.
It is absolutely mind-blowing to realize that the Indus Valley civilization achieved the world's first comprehensive urban sanitation systems. We are talking covered brick drains lining major streets and private wells for homes thousands of years ago. It's incredible. Furthermore, researcher Michel Danino found that their fired bricks followed a strict 4:2:1 dimensional ratio. That reveals an advanced surveying and geometric brilliance that is just staggering. You can see this mastery perfectly preserved in the watertight engineering of the Great Bath at Mohenjo-Daro.
The big takeaway here is that these ancient layouts weren't just random or arbitrary, not at all. They were direct, practical responses to hydrology, climate, and topography. Mesopotamia's emergent structure was a necessary adaptation to flood-prone marsh environments, which required really complex canals. Meanwhile, Mesoamerican cities managed water through reservoirs to survive repeated, brutal drought episodes without the help of large beasts of burden. So this really establishes the deep roots of ecological planning. They intuitively used their specific environment as the literal foundation for their design.
All right, let's shift gears to Section 4, Reading the Urban Environment.
So how do we actually take all this historical perspective and apply it today? Well, modern theorists like Kevin Lynch asked a really vital question back in his seminal work from 1960. He basically asked, what does a city's form actually mean to the people who live there? He introduced this concept called imageability. It's about approaching the city not just as a bunch of concrete and asphalt, but as a visual and cognitive text that inhabitants are actively reading and experiencing every single day.
To have true urban literacy, it requires a genuinely interdisciplinary understanding. We have to recognize the physical infrastructure, sure, but we also have to see the social, historical, and cultural elements layered on top of it. By identifying those urban binaries in our own neighborhoods and recognizing how past knowledge has been amalgamated into new tools, we really empower ourselves. It gives us the tools to advocate for better, more responsive design in the actual spaces we live in.
Moving into Section 5, Essential Urban Planning Books. Consider this your ultimate syllabus.
To truly master this language of urban literacy, we've put together a curated toolkit of foundational texts. For historical context, you absolutely have to start with Lewis Mumford's award-winning The City in History, which masterfully maps out the forms and functions of cities throughout the ages. Then there's Edmund Bacon's Design of Cities, which shows us how a million little decisions generate urban forms by looking at historic city-making. And of course, we absolutely cannot forget Ebenezer Howard's Garden Cities of Tomorrow from way back in 1898. It was this highly progressive vision for an ideal town, offering a peaceful path away from overcrowded, polluted English slums.
Now, when it comes to modern visions and critiques, Jane Jacobs's The Death and Life of Great American Cities is just legendary. She brilliantly critiques how official attempts at saving cities have completely failed and instead explains what actually makes them function organically and safely. Then you've got Jeff Speck's Walkable City, which provides really practical steps to revitalize downtowns by prioritizing the pedestrian. And we can contrast that organic, street-level view with Carlo Rotti and Matthew Claudel's The City of Tomorrow, which takes a fascinating, optimistic look at the future intersection of cities, digital networks, sensors, and even hackers.
Finally, for our core environmental and spatial guides, Ian McHarg's 1969 book, Design with Nature, is just phenomenal. He essentially birthed the entire field of ecological planning by pushing designers to use the ecosystem as the very foundation of urban design. Sound familiar? It's a direct tieback to how those ancient cities we were just talking about intuitively managed their environments. Add in Christopher Alexander's A Pattern Language for Spatial Design at literally any scale, and Charles Waldheim's The Landscape Urbanism Reader, and you've got a complete masterclass right in your hands.
And that brings us to our final section, Section 6, Designing the Future City.
So how does all of this connect to designing the future city? It really comes down to this core thesis. By understanding the amalgamations of the past, from the egalitarian, highly standardized sanitation of the ancient Indus Valley, all the way to the modern ecological frameworks pioneered by people like Ian McHarg, we can build much more resilient, sustainable cities. Embracing the multiplicity and the incredibly varied, complex solutions of our past is honestly the only way we are going to solve contemporary challenges, things like climate change, resource limitation, and endless urban sprawl. So I want to leave you with a bit of a challenge. Next time you step away from the screen, take a moment and just look out your window. Take a walk outside today and really start reading your own city. Think about it. Which ancient layout, maybe a planned grid or an organic multicentric form, best applies to your neighborhood? Which modern theory is playing out right in front of you on your street? The city is speaking to you every single day. And now you've got the vocabulary to listen. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep exploring.